The first storm of the season pounding the state with snow and icy rain today and putting the state's transportation system to a little bit of a test. But the T says the largest disruption of the day, a train derailment at South Station, wasn't even weather-related, and many chalked up the resulting delays to just another day on the T. And for the few who brave the roads, the light traffic made for an easier and safer snow day commute. But how do we get fewer cars on the road every day? Last week, I asked Transportation Secretary Stephanie Pollack if the Baker administration was considering congestion pricing, charging more in tolls, for example, during high traffic hours.
Traffic is so awful that if people actually had an alternative to the awful traffic, I'm not sure that paying a little bit more is what would make the biggest difference. The places that have really gotten people to do more walking and biking transit have improved the quality of walking, biking, and transit, so people choose them. If you charge people a fee for driving when they don't have a better alternative, you're punishing them.
But not everyone agrees, including, I'm guessing, my next guest. Chris Dempsey is Director of Transportation for Massachusetts, coalition of organizations aiming to improve transportation across the state. Chris, good to see you.
You too, Jim.
Stacy Thompson is the Executive Director of LivableStreets, a transportation advocacy group. Stacy, it's good to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Can we just suppose today was not a bad weather test, right? I mean, there was nobody on the roads to begin with. And so is there any reason to think that the state is not up to tomorrow, Chris?
Well, it's not even the winter yet, and I know Governor Baker has said people are going to be satisfied with the winter performance. I think that we are in for some real questions about how the system is going to perform. If you look at the projects that the T has promised, things like new orange and red line cars, they're behind on those projects. So it's not just about blaming the legacy infrastructure, it's also about the responsibility that they have for things that they've talked about fixing. And it hasn't been shown to real riders yet.
So if you're a commuter, you'd be nervous about tomorrow or no?
Yeah, you know, today I literally got on the Orange Line. I've been excited to try a new Orange Line car for months, and instead I got on an orange car line that was literally dripping. People couldn't sit down because the inside was wet. And, you know, I think people are going to be able to get to work tomorrow, to get to school, but I don't know they'll get there on time.
Maybe you should just carry an umbrella on. You wouldn't have to worry about it. So is charging a fee for driving punishment, as Stephanie Pollack said?
The punishment is the status quo. And you have two choices in transportation policy right now. You're either embracing change and new ideas, like congestion pricing that places like San Francisco, Seattle, and New York are all studying and embracing, or you are embracing the status quo.
She said she responded to that, Chris, by saying early morning bus service, late night bus service. We're doing a lot of experimental things.
Well, as she knows, buses are the poorest performing MBTA service. Not because the T doesn't do a good job of having them start on time, but because they get stuck in so much traffic congestion that they're late something like 40% of the time. That would be unacceptable if it were commuter rail or a red line service, but somehow it's okay for bus service.
You looked like your head was going to pop off there for a second.
You know, what I find frustrating about this conversation is twofold. One, that you know, no one in Europe thinks that it's unfair that they have multiple options, that they actually know how prices are, how roads are priced. You know, I think that the report got London wrong, and you talked about that yesterday. But more importantly, you know, we need to raise revenue, and we definitely disagree with this notion that we don't need money today or tomorrow. In addition to buses not running on time, we are 67 buses short of meeting the T's own service standards, meaning that any day of the week, it's unlikely your bus is going to show up on time. What does that mean? We need more buses, more operators, more dispatchers today, and I don't see the administration responding to that.
You know, she said about this London thing, that if it's such a great idea, it's in a limited part of downtown London, this congestion pricing thing, why aren't they expanding it if it's reducing traffic? And for those who weren't watching last week, they say the administration has virtually no change in traffic downtown. The people in London say it's cut traffic almost in half.
They have, and they have actually expanded it twice. So I'm not quite sure where she got that talking point, but it is incorrect.
And we don't have to go across the pond here to talk about London and Stockholm, which have had this in place for decades. Let's talk about competitor regions like Seattle. When they put congestion pricing in place on a bridge, the SR 520 bridge, that looks a lot like our Tobin Bridge, they saw traffic volumes over the bridge decrease by 34% and bus ridership increase by 38% at the same time. You are giving people better options by properly pricing and managing their roads.
But you know, what I don't understand is it's sort of like when everybody's looking at the exact same set of facts, and as I said to Stephanie Pollack last week, she and her boss are pretty smart people.
They are.
they want the exact same thing you do. They want less congested roads. They want more people on the T. If the evidence is as obvious as you two suggest, then why aren't they just doing it? Why did he turn down a congestion pricing pilot, which, by the way, if he didn't like, he unilaterally could end.
Right, and it had bipartisan support in the House and the Senate.
So why is he not doing it?
Look, I think that this is a hard political conversation, and they're fearful that if they open this Pandora's box, that people should be paying to drive on certain roads at certain times, that it's never going to end and it's going to get out of their control.
They're willing to raise T fares. Why aren't they worried about that?
They've raised T fares twice since they've come into office.
So why aren't they worried about that?
Because, unfortunately, T riders are less of a political constituency than drivers are. And if you look at the governor's base, they are folks that are driving in and to cities or driving in the suburbs, and he does not want to anger those people.
You know, you mentioned a second ago, Stacy, the big money thing. I started my interview with Stephanie Pollack the other night talking about the $18 billion in borrowing that they're willing, or not willing, anxious to do, and the $50 billion that a better city has proposed. And I think it's fair to summarize what Secretary Pollack said is those really aren't different. They're just different time frames. We're talking about $18 billion in the short run. The $50 billion people are talking about it in the long run. Is there no difference between these things?
Look, it's complicated. What I would say is we definitely need that $18 billion, but that is scratching the surface of the future.
What does it not get us that 50 does?
It doesn't get us the 60 buses that I mentioned. It doesn't get us the operators and the people that we need. You know, when we look at the T, we have raised, as Chris mentioned, we have raised fares twice. We are still running an operating deficit, and we actually have fewer people working for the T today than we did in 2015. I mean, we don't have enough people to run the system properly. That is a today need. That's something like the gas tax, something like some of these other options can help fill that gap in the short term. Those are not major capital projects. That's just getting the system to run the way we need it to today.
A guest on my show said today that we couldn't speed up work on the T. I think for that very reason, because there aren't enough managers. Is the union standing in the way? What is standing in the way from raising more dough and hiring more managers?
Look, and we're sympathetic to the administration that you can't fix every problem at the T overnight. But in your interview with the secretary, you raised a great point about the model in MIT, where they raised the price of parking and they lowered the price of MBTA passes for their employees at the same time. She has the power, the administration has the power to do exactly the same thing at the state level. We could take a gas tax increase and we could use that to lower MBTA fares, balancing those incentives better than they are today. Instead, for the last 30 years, and you've heard me say this before, Jim, MBTA fares have gone up 300%, while the gas tax has gone up just 14% in that same period of time. So the message we're sending people is drive more and take the T less.
Stacey, what's the most important thing you would do if you were the czarina of this whole deal? No legislative approval, Baker doesn't have to sign off. What's the one thing you do that would help in a big-time way almost right away?
The one thing that I would do tomorrow is create a low-income fare option and make sure that any person can afford to get on the T. Secondarily, I would order more buses and increase service for the MBTA and the RTAs. Our RTAs resource people who don't have cars across the state, and they don't have evening service, weekend service. Those two things could be done by the administration tomorrow.
How about you?
And I would take Stacey's idea of more buses, and I would say let's get those buses moving faster by having dedicated bus lanes throughout the region, and places where dedicated lanes don't make sense, larger highways. Let's price those roads properly, like Seattle and New York and Chicago and Miami are doing, and get them moving faster through better road management.
Do you ever say, I was thinking about you today, you were one of the leaders, for those who don't know, the effort to stop the Olympics in 2024. Do you ever say to yourself, I made a mistake, that if there was an Olympics here in 24, maybe the sense of urgency that you two are suggesting maybe missing would have been there?
Jim, if today's status quo is not urgent enough for our elected leaders, then we need new elected leaders.
Nice to see you, Stacey. Thanks so much for your time. Chris, pleasure as always. Appreciate it.